Tonight, we have none other than the gracious and erudite Rainey Knudson of Glasstire fame here to share her vast insights and reflections on art as she has experienced it through her longtime role at Glasstire. Nationally recognized, Glasstire is an online art magazine that has reported and supported the visual arts for more than 18 years to date, making it the oldest online art magazine in the country. In 2000, living in Houston, as she does now with her husband, the artist Michael Galbraith, and their son, Rainey Knudson, trained in literature and entrepreneurship, and having a deep interest in art, made the courageous and adventurous move to start an online art magazine, much to the benefit of art enthusiasts across this state. I can't even imagine pulling the trigger on such an ambitious undertaking, but I'm glad Rainey did. During the early years, she was Glasstire's sole employee, working as editor, publisher, salesperson, and administrator. Under her leadership and with the amazing staff that she has worked with over the years, Glasstire has continued to expand its reach, keeping its finger on the pulse, maintaining its standards, and remaining relevant throughout. While there is much to celebrate about Glasstire, it is Rainey's recent announcement of stepping down as publisher that brings us here tonight for what has become a statewide farewell lecture tour, in which Rainey shares the story of Glasstire from its origins, including what she has described as the juicy bits, as well as what she has learned by following Glasstire's tagline, "Go see some art." So without further delay, please join me in welcoming the very special Rainey Knudson.
Thank you, and thank you to Terry Thornton and the Fort Worth Modern. I have to tell a little story. In 2011, it was our 10-year anniversary, and I hadn't gotten organized and hadn't really thought about what to do to commemorate the first decade of Glasstire. And I called Terry Thornton, and she was like, well, why don't you do a panel here at the museum? And so that is what she did. And she was a miracle worker, and she does that for many organizations and many people throughout Texas, throughout the art world. So everyone, and she also runs this incredible lecture series, which is one of the best in Texas. So a big hand to Terry Thornton, yes. She is wonderful. So it is very appropriate that we are here tonight in Fort Worth. I remember when this building was built, and some of my first Texas art memories when I finished grad school and was doing a print magazine before I started Glasstire were from the old Fort Worth Modern building. I vividly remember a Wayne Thiebaud retrospective there that was wonderful. I vividly remember the Robert Gober installation that had the prison window and the butter stick on the floor. And when this new building opened up in 2002, we covered it on Glasstire. And so coming up to Fort Worth was part of my education that actually led me to believe that doing a website was the thing to do, to tie this together. I'm from Houston originally. I went to Rice for undergrad. I'm very much a Houston person. And when I finished graduate school, I moved back to Houston, and I started doing this print magazine. And in doing the print magazine, it was called Canvas, and it's very forgettable. And if any of you have an issue, I hope you go home and burn it, because it was not good. But in doing so, one of the things I started doing was traveling to other Texas cities, and I was going in what's called the Texas Triangle, the Texas megalopolis, and coming up to the Metroplex for the first time really ever, and certainly for the first time to see the museums here, and also going to Austin and San Antonio. And it was about this time, we were doing a print magazine in Houston and a print magazine in Dallas. And it was about this time I did my very first trip ever to West Texas. This was 1999. I flew into Amarillo, rented a car. This is the exact route I took. That little dog leg to the right, or that sort of stick to the right, is San Angelo, the San Angelo Museum. You can see I made the required pilgrimage down to Marfa, which was a very different place in those days, and then flew back from El Paso and saw whatever there was to see in between. And The more I traveled both in the Texas Triangle and doing this trip out in West Texas, the more I realized that there was a need to tie this whole thing together. And the distances, of course, are very, very great. This is Beaumont. So Beaumont is not even all the way to the East Texas border. Beaumont to El Paso, 827 miles. You know, New York to Chicago's only 789, and of course, LA to El Paso, only 802. So if you're in El Paso, you're closer to Los Angeles than you are to Beaumont. We're big. But this was the idea. One of the things I like to say on my bullet list of obnoxious jingoistic Texas things that I like to say is that we have 6 cities in the top 20 largest cities in America, which is more than California has. And I'm allowed to say that because I was born in California. But in any event, all these 6 cities, all of which, by the way, in 2008 voted for Barack Obama, with the exception of Fort Worth. And all of which I think voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, with the exception of Fort Worth. Did Fort Worth go for Hillary Clinton?
All 3 of those.
Oh, really? Maybe you're talking about the county. I may be fudging a little bit. I'm giving Fort Worth a hard time. It's a great city. Anyway, between the Texas Triangle and El Paso, you're talking about 80% of the population of Texas. So this is a point I really do try to make with people, is that yes, the distances are very vast, but the population centers are in these concentrated areas that are pretty sophisticated and pretty progressive. And like everywhere else in the country, we have this rural-urban thing that goes on that really informs our statewide politics. End of jingoistic Texas note. But this is the idea. This imaginary line that's drawn around this little patch of the surface of the earth, the ethos of this, the people in this, the spirit of this, the art in this is the idea that I was interested in trying to connect with itself, trying to connect with the rest of the country and with the rest of the world through the internet. People always ask me where I got the name. The name comes from this gentleman. It's Robert Rauschenberg, of course, who hailed from, anyone? Port Arthur, close. Part of the Golden Triangle, I think they call the rather ungolden triangle of Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Orange, Texas, home of the first oil gusher, and it's gone downhill from there. But yes, he was from Port Arthur, like Janis Joplin, a wonderful artist, of course, and in 1998, I saw a retrospective of his that was shared at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Menil Collection, and the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston. And there were these glass tires, and I remembered these tires, and I loved the tension in them and the tension in the name. And so when it came time to pick a name for this thing that I was starting, I didn't want to use the word Texas, and I didn't want to use the word art. So I, as an homage to Robert Rauschenberg, I called it Glasstire. And this is the idea of it. These are, of course, just the big institutions. This doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of artist-run spaces and galleries and non-collecting smaller nonprofits and all kinds of venues all over the state of Texas. But we are trying to connect all of these venues to each other and to the world. And it has been a lot of fun. So, in the year 2000, this is what websites looked like. Remember this? Remember this? This is the very, very, very first homepage of Glasstire. I built this original site. You can see that we've got a little bit from Austin, a little bit from Dallas, a little bit from Houston, trying to cover the whole state. I say we at the time. It was I and one freelance writer, Bill Davenport, who later became our editor. I pretty quickly realized that the black background wasn't super attractive. So this was our second homepage, which I also built using Dreamweaver. Static HTML pages for any tech nerds in the room. These are static HTML web pages, all individually connected to each other. So there's no database. It's very crude. But you can see we had added a navigation bar across the top, which was becoming the standard. This was the first site we had a state of Texas. And you can see we had message boards. So Anyone, show of hands, does anyone remember the Glasstire message boards? Yes, a few of you. God bless you. Yeah. So before you could leave a comment at the end of an article, we had these things called message boards, and they were little forums, and they were this sort of horrible troll corner of the website that you could go visit, but you didn't actually see if you were on the rest of the website. This ran off of a Microsoft Access database for whatever it's worth, and we didn't even have the word trolling at the time, but yes, indeed, that is what went on there. And that was the first time we discovered, whoa, people will say anything on the internet, won't they? And the first time this really got serious was when somebody put satirically, I believe, the comment that they had been molested as a child by a prominent museum director in Texas. No, not somebody in Fort Worth. And I immediately called our lawyer on the board and I said, oh my God. And she said, take it down, take it down, take it down. So does anyone know the legal definition of libel? Anyone? Shout it out. Does anyone know what libel is? Okay, for something to be libel, oh, and libel is written and slander is spoken, but they're the same thing. For some, I heard somebody say libel, do you know? What's that? Lies, okay, so it's not just lies. It has to be both damaging and untrue. And to prove it in a court of law, you also have to prove intent, which is another, makes it even harder. Both damaging and untrue. So, if you say that Donald Trump attended Harvard University, it is not libel, because even though it is untrue, it is not damaging. Likewise, if you say that many of Donald Trump's very close associates are convicted felons, it is also not libel, because even though it is damaging, or at least it should be, it is also true. So that's libel. I don't know about Dick Cheney being a robot, but it seems plausible. Anyway, in 2003, we launched this, which was our very first professionally designed website. A Houston artist named Paul Kramer designed this, if any of you all know Paul Kramer. And as you can see, we wanted it to be colorful and fun. This is when people thought the web should be colorful and fun. And this was the first time that you can see the advertisements. This was the first time we had advertisements, and they're very controlled, and they're all the same color, and we didn't want to contaminate ourselves with advertising. And of course now, we'll sell advertising to anybody. We will gladly sell advertising, and we will not make you conform to our color scheme. Have we ever lost advertisers over content on Glasstire? Yes, many times. We have had people get upset over something that was published on Glasstire and say, we're pulling our advertising. And yes, when Glasstire was a smaller organization, that hurt sometimes. But I'm glad to say our best advertisers have stuck with us through thick and thin, and we made it. And we're a nonprofit, so we had other forms of revenue, thankfully. Anyway. This was our next website, which we launched, I think, in 2008. This was our first SQL-based database, for whatever it's worth. And you can see we had introduced polls, and we had our events on the homepage, but it was still very colorful. And it was about this time that a writer in Dallas reviewed a show that I think, Christina, I may need some help. I think it was at a Starbucks. And the guy who had set this up, or at some coffee shop, and the boyfriend of the artist, who was an older gentleman, had sort of arranged this and been really hitting us hard with PR for this terrible, terrible, terrible show. And so a writer of ours in Dallas decided to do a takedown of this show and how awful it was. And the older gentleman, whose boyfriend was the artist in the show, calls me and told me that he was going to fucking kill me if we didn't take this down. So, what do you do when somebody calls you and tells you that they're going to fucking kill you if you don't take something down from your website? I am sorry to say that I folded immediately. And in my defense, I will say I was 8.5 months pregnant, and I was not in an emotional state to cope with this. But if I had it to do it all over again, I would tell that SOB to stick it where the sun doesn't shine. But just so you know, sometimes you have to make these decisions in life and decide whether or not you want to tangle with somebody. In 2011, our site was hacked, and it went down for 3 weeks, which is an eternity. It was hacked by Russians, or at least we traced the hack to Russia. It could have been a bot, probably was a bot. But anyway, we recovered from that and launched this site which was our first sort of standard white background, heavy content site, which is sort of the standard for sites like ours today. This site became this site, which we launched, I'm guessing 2013, 2014. And then last fall, we launched this site, which is the site as you see it today. And each time, the changes, as you can see, get less and less obvious, and it's much more about responsiveness to these things, because this is changing the way everybody deals with everything. And anyone who tells you that they know what's happening and they know how what direction people are going in, unless their name is Marshall McLuhan, risen from the dead, I don't think that they do know, because nobody knows. Nobody in online advertising knows, nobody in content. We're just all like trying to keep up with the way people interact with the web. So that's the first 18 years of Glasstire, and it is big, and even though the site can fit on probably a 500 gigabyte disk easily, it's a lot. It's a lot of content that we've written. We're very proud of that. All these venues all over Texas, many of which don't exist anymore. 400 writers that we've published in Texas and a few elsewhere. We're very proud of that legacy. And the archive grows every single day. So that's the history of Glasstire. Now, what is it that we do exactly? Well, what we do is we take our little needle nose of death and we stick it into the heads of artists and we suck out all their joy of life and willingness to create, and we fill them with despair and self-loathing. I'm kidding, that's not what we do. This is a piece by Julio Ruelas, a Mexican artist. It's from 1907, and it's called The Critic. And I thought that was fitting. No, that's not what we do. That's not what we try to do. This is from one of my all-time favorite movies, Ratatouille. This is Anton Ego, the fearsome, terrifying food critic who has the power to shut down restaurants. I love this character so much. It's one of the best character arcs in all of movies. And at the end, what's that?
It's based on a true story.
Is it based on a true story?
The character exists, yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. I didn't know that. Oh, well, what he says at the end of the movie is that the most mediocre thing in the world is more meaningful. The most mediocre work of art, let's say, in the world is more meaningful than any criticism that we can write, designating it so. And what he means by that, and what I believe is true by that, is that the artists are on the field and we are on the sidelines. And we must always remember that it is easy to stand on the sidelines and judge the art that is put out there. It is terrifying for artists, and it requires such courage and such grit for them to make work and put it out there to be judged by us. So we try to always keep that in mind. But, says Anton Ego, there is a role for criticism, and there is a place that criticism plays a very, very important role, and that is in the discovery and defense of the new. And I've loved that idea, and even though Ratatouille came out long after I started Glasstire, I believe that that spirit is a lot of what informed the creation of the site to begin with, the discovery and defense of the new, and Texas being seen as not the center of the art world in the United States and needing discovery and defense. Many of the artists who were choosing to live here needing to have a spotlight put on it. So that's where that idea comes back to that. A.O. Scott, who is the movie critic for the New York Times, I think puts it better than I do, and even Anton Ego does. Resist and manufacture consensus, interrogate the successful, exalt the unknown, defense of the new, argue for ambiguity and complexity. It's the only antidote we have to paid publicity. If you guys want to read press releases all day, and believe me, if you want to have my email feed, you can. Trust me, you don't. That's not what you want to read about criticism. This is Bruce Nauman. The main thing about what we do is we try to do what artists do, which is to draw everyone's attention to something important. So artists, all art is drawing people's attention to some aspect of reality. All criticism is drawing our readers, our visitors' attention to art that we think is important to talk about, for good, for bad, for whatever. So, over the years, we've developed some rules of the road. This is Houston. This is not even the biggest freeway in Houston. This is just sort of the backside of downtown. This is Vincent Valdez, San Antonio artist who now lives in Houston. He did a series of boxers. Punch up, not down. What we mean by that is when we decide to criticize a show and write a negative review or publish a negative op-ed, we are not picking on smaller spaces. We would never pick on a space that we think, generally speaking, doesn't do that strong of a program. We're gonna interrogate the successful, as A.O. Scott says. We are going to punch up and say, everyone's saying this thing is great, and we don't think so, and this is why. On the contrary, if there is a space that we don't think does great shows all the time, but they do something good, that's when we really try and give them attention and reward them with some attention for that. Punch up, not down. Tell the truth. Grant Wood from the Amon Carter Up the Hill. I love this painting. American primitive painting is just a joy and so weird. And this painting is particularly weird. The way he's drawing back the curtain on his man face on his little child body with the axe, you know, and then further back in the background, the African Americans taking care of the cherry tree. What's going on? I think there are many truths in this painting. Truth is ambiguous sometimes, but you have to tell the truth. We have to say what we really believe. And sometimes that can be very, very hard to do at Glasstire, telling the truth. Related to that, Lynda Benglis from the Fort Worth Modern. This piece is on view right now in the galleries. I have written things over the years where I have come out very hard against a show or a museum building or something like that. And it can be very nerve-wracking to publish those articles. It's not comfortable and it's not pleasant. And I had the pleasure of meeting Lynda Benglis, the artist of this piece, last summer. And I asked her about this very, very famous episode where she did a double-page spread in art form. This was in 1972, I think, where she was wearing nothing but a pair of sunglasses and holding a big dildo. And it was a comment on how art form was not giving women artists enough attention. And I've always thought, like, yeah, Lynda Benglis doing the dildo picture in art form, she's a badass. And I asked her about it last summer, and she told me how very terrifying it was to do that, how nervous she felt, how uncomfortable she felt with the, like, knowing that this was going out there. And if you look at all of her work looks like this mostly. It doesn't look like, you know, lady in sunglasses, buck naked with a, you know, bikini tan line. And I thought of that, and I thought, you know, to do that thing that seems in retrospect so obvious, to take out your sledgehammer of truth and bring it crashing down is not easy. And so we always have to remind ourselves, rule of the road, be brave like Lynda. Another rule is that art is not just in our wonderful, big, wealthy institutions. Art is everywhere. This is Christy Blizzard. This is a San Antonio artist whose work I just admire very much. She did a series where she appeared at the Today Show and Good Morning America with these kind of ambiguous signs like wanting not to want. I think one said the death of painting. She finally was asked not to come back to the Today Show or to Good Morning America. She's had to move on with her practice, but Christy Blizzard taking the art into the most public sphere. I love this. And so we at Glasstire are always trying to look for art where art is not typically found and remember that it is everywhere. And as Anton Ego says, to paraphrase, not everybody can make great art, but great art can come from anywhere. Sometimes it can be such a drag in the art world, and I try to remind myself that the whole reason we got into this thing in the first place was because these people seem smarter and more fun and dressed better and more interesting than other people. This is Jimmy James Canalis. He's a San Antonio artist. I love his work. He makes objects, he does performance. He's great. Anyway, this is supposed to be fun, remember? That's a rule of the road. Related to this, art is not church, and this is something I do write about and I have written about, the religiosity, and I don't mean to pick on Dan Flavin, for goodness sake, but gosh, like some of these places and the black-clad acolytes of the art world making their pilgrimages from site to site and saying the doctrinal things that one is supposed to say, it can all be a bit much. I sometimes feel like people who have given up on traditional religion have adopted the contemporary art world as their new church. And that's definitely not why I got into art. I don't know about you guys. Related to this, we at Glasstire, we are not a monolith. And it's easy to forget that. For us, in the trenches, in a small, nimble organization, it's easy to forget that sometimes from the outside we are perceived as this gigantic entity that exists on a whole floor of an office building and with many minions scurrying about, and it looks like the Washington Post. We are not that. We are small, and but we have to take that responsibility very, very seriously. The reason that we are seen to be a monolith sometimes is the deceptiveness of what it is that we fundamentally are. So I looked up this word, and I want to ask, I like to look up the etymology of words. Does anyone in here know the origin of the word media? Does anyone know where it comes from or what it means? What's that? It's Latin. It is Latin. So I didn't know. I had to look it up. Media has a very sinister idea in our minds. When we think of the media, we think of something big and evil and scary, but it is not, etymologically speaking, anything big or evil or scary. It's something very simple. It is that which is in the middle. It is the middle layer. We are in the middle between the art and the audience, and that's it. That's all it is. It actually is very innocuous when you think of it. It's the connective tissue between the thing that is seen or consumed or listened to and the person doing the consuming. But we're not just media, we're internet media, right? And that has changed the whole game in ways that I could never, ever have imagined when in 2000 I was driving around Texas thinking I could do a website and it would be a lot cheaper than doing a print magazine. So the word internet is a much newer word than media. It was coined in the 1970s. And it also is actually rather benign. If you think about net, a net can be negative in the sense you're caught in the detective's net, or it can be benign in the sense of the net that catches the trapeze artist. But it is this sense of interwebbing, interconnectedness. And that's where it's different from the old communications technologies of yore, these one-way communications technologies, where you created the content and you sent it out to people and they consumed it. And there was no give and take, with the exception, of course, of the telephone. And which is why I think that thing we carry around in our pockets is called the iPhone and not the iTelegraph or the iRadio or the iTV. But all of these were in one direction with the exception of the phone and all single channel. And the idea of the internet, of course, is this net, is this forum. This is the Roman Forum in the ruins in the center part of Rome. And in the olden days, before you had printing presses, you would gather in the center of the city where you did almost all of your social activities. You caught up on your news, you did your shopping, you participated in whatever religious rites you wanted to, you might have looked at a little porn. Whatever it was you did in this shared public space, the forum. And it's very nice to think about the internet as a forum where we all gather and we wear togas and we're talking about how's the Senate doing today. And I like that idea a lot. But the reality on the internet is that it doesn't feel like this. The reality is that it feels much more like this, right? This is Peter Bruegel the Elder. This is the fall of the rebel angels, 1562. It feels crazy and chaotic and dangerous and out of control out there. I like this detail. It's just, he and Hieronymus Bosch were digging into the same territory, I guess. But yeah, there's a reason, and there is a reason why today in particular it is feeling so crazy and so out of control out there. And it's not just humanity. It's something else, and I've written about this quite a bit. And I finally, myself, got off of Facebook last year after several tries. It was hard, and I'm here to tell you that my life is much happier and saner and calmer without Facebook. Hi, I'm Rainey. I'm a Facebook addict. I really was like at a certain point spending at least 3 hours a day on Facebook. But the problem with this is, and not to pick on Facebook, because it's not just Facebook, of course. The problem with this is these are, on the one hand, just communications technologies, right? Everyone freaked out about the telegraph. Everyone freaked out about the radio and TV and the loss of intellectualism, and this is what's going to happen. And these are just more of new technologies for human beings communicating with each other. The difference, of course, if you remember back to my message boards and that awful post that that person satirically posted on the message boards, is that the business model depends on people saying awful things and all of us engaging in the awfulness and consuming it in this weird way that we are sort of hardwired biologically to consume bad news and to remember the negative. They make money off of our focus on the negative. And the other difference with social media versus previous technologies, of course, is that the scope of the people that you can reach through social media is so much vaster than television or anything. It dwarfs everything we had before. And so the people who are really, really good at using social media and at using these technologies are getting a degree of success nowadays in our culture. And at least Kanye has put out a really good album, as opposed to the other guy. But I will say that, yes, we had famous people. Yes, we had famous awful people before social media. But there's a new kind of reward, it feels like, going to people who are able to use this technology to their advantage. And not to pick on people whose politics are different from my own. Anyone yell it out? Who's the most famous art critic in America? Jerry Saltz, ladies and gentlemen, Jerry Saltz. I'm jealous of Jerry Saltz, how he so cheerfully uses social media and promotes himself and puts himself out there, warts and all the time. I could never do that. I don't think Jerry Saltz is successful only because he's good at social media and uses it rapidly and was on that train early on. I think he's a great writer. I like Jerry Saltz. I don't mean to pick on him. But I also think that the reason that he is a household name, as much as any art critic in America is a household name, is because of his successful use of social media. So that leads me to this guy. What? Who? So I studied English literature as an undergraduate, and when I think about the 16th century, I think about Shakespeare. I think about the Tudors. I think about Christopher Marlowe and, maybe the Fairy Queen and that kind of stuff. Or I think about, the art being made in the Netherlands and Italy, obviously, pretty good time there. Or I think about maybe Spanish colonialism in the New World and what was going on with Spain and Mexico, present-day Mexico and South America, et cetera. You never think about France in the 16th century. Why do we never think about France? Why do we never talk about the French Renaissance? Well, there's a reason for this. And the reason is that in France, in the 16th century, during this guy's lifetime, in the second half of the 16th century, an estimated 3 million people died in religious wars between Protestants and Catholics. And you think, oh yeah, 3 million people, ooh. But if 3 million people had died in the United States in the last 30 years in religious armed conflict, that would be 6 times as many people who have died of AIDS in the United States. It is a staggering number. It was a terrible time in France. Weak kings, awful time, shit show. But here's this guy in the southwest of France who writes some of the most warm and funny and beautiful humanist essays. Michel de Montaigne coined the term essay, and he writes in what we would now recognize as a blogging style, and he writes about all these different topics. He writes about how to have a good death and prepare yourself for a good death, and he writes about the folly of our human desire for everlasting fame, and he writes about having thumbs and eating and sleeping, and he writes about everything. I strongly recommend that you read these essays. I read them. I started reading them a couple of years ago. I'm sure I ran across them as an undergraduate, but I had forgotten all about the guy. And I ran across them because Tilda Swinton had listed them in a listicle of books to read in the New York Times, and I will do anything that Tilda Swinton tells me to do. But my point in all of this is not just that this guy is great and his writings are great, which they are. My point is that it has always been a shit show. And indeed, what I have taken from reading Michel de Montaigne's essays over the past couple of years is that it is our job as human beings to live a good life, to figure out a way to live a good life in the midst of a shit show. Indeed, it is our duty. It is the only option we have ever had, ever. Because guess what? This painting isn't recent. People have always thought the world was crazy and out of control and in a really bad way and violent. And I am in no way, when I say this, advocating for anyone to not be an engaged citizen and not work to make the world a better place. But what I am saying is that we need to put our current moment in perspective and realize that the social media is making us crazy. All of which leads me back to this. One of the things that gives my life purpose, that has given my life purpose over the past 18 years, is this. And it's not just what we do on the internet and the ideas that we present on the internet. It is the real spaces, it is the real people, it is the artists who live in Texas, and it is the art. This is the thing that has made my life worthwhile over the past 18 years. And hopefully it's one of the things that makes y'all's lives worthwhile too. Because here we are, right? In the middle of this place, more or less in the middle of this continent, and we're in this place, and I have to make a side note about being in Texas and the notion of regionalism and provincialism, because I think it is so easy for human beings to only appreciate that which is not in their own backyard and to denigrate that which is in their own backyard. It is so easy to think like, well, that artist is here, I mean, they're not that good. But this artist who lives in this place far away, they're the real artist, right? And it's especially easy to think this because the marketplace and the prices we all read about are not here. The art market such as it exists in Texas is nothing compared to the art market elsewhere. And we all know this, of course. But of course, if you look up the etymology of the word provincial or provincialism, all it means, quite innocuously, is belonging to a province. And oh, by the way, the island of Manhattan is a province, just like everywhere else. So what we try to do at Glasstire is remind everyone to appreciate that which is in your own backyard. And as much as possible to stay away from this side of the art world, right? And I don't mean to pick on the Venice Biennale because it is very wonderful and Venice is wonderful and everything is wonderful. But let's be real, the art world brings it on ourselves, brings this Coen Brothers mockery. We bring it on ourselves with the ridiculousness and the aspect of the art world that sometimes feels like it's a bunch of sixth graders clawing to get to the top of the heap of the cool kids, wearing the right clothes, knowing who the right artists are. And in this moment, this is from The Big Lebowski, in this moment when this artist, played by David Thewlis, is introduced to The Big Lebowski, Maud Lebowski says, it's Knox, I forget what his name is, Knox, does anyone know Knox? Knox Harrington. It's Knox Harrington, the video artist, as if he's supposed to know who the video artist is. And we get into this in the art world a lot, where we trade on information and we're all afraid of being caught out of not having heard of something or not knowing something. Try not to fall into that trap. It's so tempting. We're humans, I understand. What we try to do is stay away from this and remember that it is the people in the community in Texas that make us who we are, that are the reason for our existence. And more than that, it is the artists in Texas that are the reason for our existence. And not all of these people are artists, but these are just snapshots I took from the last about 18 months on my phone. And you will see Terry Thornton on the bottom there. And I've been giving this talk since December in El Paso, and I didn't put you in, Terry, just for today. You've been in there since December in El Paso. I will miss this aspect of Glasstire and these people, but Glasstire will live on without me, and it is going to continue. And Brandon Zeck is our new publisher, and Brandon is here tonight, right in the middle. There he is. Everyone. Brandon is fantastic, and please introduce yourself to him and find ways to help him out and help Glasstire out. We're going to need everybody's support. As for me, I am moving on. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. That is terrifying. But I'm trying to remember, in the words of the great Dave Hickey, beauty isn't always will be blue skies and open highway. I love that idea. I love that our highways are 85 miles an hour out in West Texas. I have some ideas. I'm really looking forward to the next phase for me. And, and I'm going to end on this note, which is that we are always looking for people to write for us. We are always looking for writers. We pay. We are looking for podcasters. We are looking for people who are good at video. Christina Reese, this is her email. She is sitting right here. Bother her. Introduce yourself to her. We recently got some funding for some bilingual coverage, which we have started. So we're doing writing in Spanish. If anyone can write in Spanish, please let us know. Don't be shy, because we only exist with the input and intelligence and eloquence of a lot of people who contribute to the site. Those 400 people that number I put up earlier, those 400 writers we published, those are probably people in this room and all over the state. So we need you. Please write for us. And with that, I thank you very much for coming out tonight. Should we do Q&A? Questions? Does anyone have any questions? Anyone? No?
Okay, I'm
What
going to
was the
start.
questions?
Yeah, questions. You have questions?
Yeah, questions.
Do you have a question?
I'm sure we can come up with some questions. Give us some time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes it takes a while to warm up. No, I'm just here. No, I'm kidding. Do you have a question, Terry?
I'll start it. Talk about the fact that you've hired so many artists as writers over the years.
Well, yes. Terry said, talk about the fact that we've hired so many artists as writers. A lot of our very best writers are themselves artists. And I think that has to do with the fact that writing is thinking, and thinking about art is difficult. And the people who have done that the most usually are artists themselves. And I think that artists have a very particular way of looking at art that, I think artists have a particular way of looking at everything that's different from the way that I look at things. So not all of our best writers have been artists, but many of them have been. Christina, would you add anything to that? What would you say?
No, I would just reiterate exactly what you said. They just have a tendency to have thought longer and harder about what they're looking at.
Yeah, not all artists are good writers, but many of our best writers are artists. Yes?
Would you comment about your history, undergraduate history, I guess, in entrepreneurship? It's a topic that I've been pursuing for some time as a mentor, mentoring artists to learn entrepreneurship.
Well, I think all good artists are entrepreneurs. And what I mean by that is that all artists find a way, and they are resourceful, and they find a studio, and they find a way to make it work. As hard as that is sometimes. My personal education, quickly, my undergraduate degree was in English literature. I did get an MBA. I knew that I wanted to have my own business someday. I had no idea in what. I had no idea what I was doing. And very serendipitously, I ended up in this print art magazine. I had grown up in the Houston art scene. My mother had a gallery when I was growing up, so I had grown up around the Houston art scene. And my very, very first art memory as a small child, I think I was 4 years old, in my Sunday school dress, my mom had taken me, and I'm looking at this painting, and it's broken plates on the surface of a painting, and it was Julian Schnabel at the CAM, I later discovered. And I got very close to it because I felt like that was the way you had to look at art, very close. So I had sort of a background in art, but not really. I was not an art historian. I've never studied art. I've never made art. I am not in any way skilled with making art. The advantage of an MBA when I got it was that I think it cost $4,000 a year. I couldn't have done Glasstire and paid the tuition that it costs now, and this is a whole other topic of conversation. But what I tell people today is if they're thinking about getting an MBA and they don't want to become a consultant or go work for Wall Street and pay off a $60,000 or $120,000 loan for 2 years, is that they should just go audit some classes in accounting and strategy and finance. because those are the best classes that I had, and those are the ones that I really remember from business school. Don't get an MBA unless you want to just go make shit tons of money to pay off that debt. It's not worth it. But yes, entrepreneurship is important. Did that answer your question?
Well, I think that from my experience, artists are entrepreneurs. They
I
just
think
don't
they
see
are.
themselves as such. And they need some help sometimes to see that.
Well, the thing that's hard, yes, all artists are entrepreneurs, and what's tough is that a lot of the artists most artists aren't good with money, and the artists who are good with money, it feels kind of gross, like Jeff Koons, honestly. But some artists are good with money. I don't know. A lot of people who are not artists are not good with money either. Yes, all artists are entrepreneurs. It is very entrepreneurial, for sure. Yes, someone else? Yes.
I'd like to know what you think about cities wrapping traffic light boxes and, but not really.
Well, I'll tell you.
How do you think the forum on Glasstire contributes to or complicates your role as educators in art? Or
Meaning, how do we reconcile ourselves with the tawdriness of it all?
yes.
Well, this is a good point. I actually wrote an article at some point called In Defense of Online Comments, and I don't totally agree with that article today. In fact, there are many, many things that I wrote on Glasstire that made me cringe today. But in our case, our comment area, we moderate it, so we read every single comment, and we reserve the right even to edit comments, because we've had comments that were pretty good, but there was one sentence that was just like, ugh, below the belt, and we will just go in and edit that out. So what? You're laughing. Yeah, well, it's a publicly posted policy. We reserve the right to edit people's comments, and we're not going to fix their grammar or their spelling, but we will if it's an otherwise good point that they're making, but they just got really gross in a couple of sentences. We'll just take those sentences out and post the comment. They're usually not using their own name anyway. I think the comments are important, and I think that anonymous comments, as awful as it is, and as much as I in some ways don't respect people who post anonymously, I think in our case, because we're not dealing with a fire hose like the New York Times or something of comments and we can read them all, I think we have to allow this to continue more than anything because it's an opportunity for artists to have a voice. And that's why we do it. And artists so often don't have a voice in the conversation. So we delete a lot of comments that you never see. We try to keep it civil. It's hard. It's gotten crazy out there. Although, I mean, the message boards were pretty crazy back in the day. Yes?
So the internet is eminently searchable. In the past, writing, you would have to go through and go to the card catalog and dig through, volumes of information to find something that had been published years and years and years ago. The fact that the internet is so immediate and readily searchable, is that, especially since you just said you've written some things that you not regret, but you may disagree with now. What do you think about how immediate everything is and how it almost seems like everything is published now?
Well, the fact of the matter is people don't read those old articles. I mean, they are out there for anyone to see, and I would use the word regret for some of them, frankly. I think that because there's so much quantity out there, I don't worry about that because people aren't, in the case of my own writing, I don't worry about like, oh God, people digging up my terrible juvenilia that's out there on Glasstire. Because I just don't think people are even looking at it. There's just so much on the internet. You'd have to really want to read Rainey's crappy youthful writing to like go find it even. In terms of the immediacy and the amount, I always hear this, particularly from people who teach, oh, our knowledge is an inch deep and a mile wide now. We can have like a cursory amount of knowledge about any subject, but nobody goes really deep into a single subject. But I don't think that's true. And I love that aspect of the internet that you're talking about. I love that aspect. I love not having to go to a card catalog, which I remember doing in high school and college. I think that the quantity and sifting through the quantity is where we're running into trouble. It's where we're running into trouble on YouTube, on Facebook. As a species, we see text, black text on a white background, and we can't perceive where that came from. We just respect it because it's printed and that's what it is, and that's sort of like where we are culturally. And I think as a species, we're gonna have to get really good at sussing out which of that is good and which of it is not. But in terms of like having everything immediately accessible, I love that personally. Anyone else? Yes.
What art excites you?
What art excites me?
What art that make you say yes?
Well, I always say it's the thing that excites me about art. I always say this for me, and I think for a lot of people, is that spark of recognition, where you feel like, I know exactly what's up with this art. I have a weakness for certain types of things, and I think everybody has their kinks that they like when it comes to art. I love materials. The show that's the show here right now. Oh my gosh, the name of the artist who does the textile. Annalise Savant, thank you. I love that textile work because I used to work in the rug business. I mean, I like art that sparks recognition for me, and that comes from all kinds of different kinds of art. I will say this, because I was thinking about abstraction lately, and I'm sorry to go on about abstract painting, but I just have to say that I know I'm not supposed to denigrate abstract painting, and I know that like sophisticated people still like it, but the fact of the matter is it just doesn't mean what it meant in 1918 or 1946. It meant something in the immediate post-war period and interwar period, and it doesn't mean the same thing today. I don't think that abstraction it just doesn't, unfortunately, it's become so integrated into our culture that it's hard to see it. I see fantastic abstraction all the time.
What is meaningful?
What is meaningful?
Yeah, what art is meaningful? If
What sparks
if abstract
recognition?
work is not meaningful.
No, it's
as
not that it's
meaningful as
not
it used to be,
meaningful.
What is meaningful?
Well, I mean, I'm just talking about my personal preference. I mean, I know that there are people who like really get off on abstract painting. So you're saying what art is meaningful? Are you wanting me to like list specific
No, I
artworks?
mean, what would you describe, if you just said that, you know, abstract art is not as meaningful as it used to be, is that right?
I don't think, I'm not saying it's not meaningful. I think it doesn't mean what it meant back when all we had was figuration before that. I think it was a political stance. It meant something. It was a comment on the horror and chaos and senselessness of these terrible wars. And it just, I don't think today it's not a comment on those things necessarily or other things. It's just that we don't read it the same way as a society. And it's hard to get your mind when you're looking at you know, post-war abstraction. It's hard to get your mind, it's in the mindset of what it felt like to be in the late 40s, coming off of all that.
So what's replaced it? Media?
What's what?
What's replaced that? What's replaced abstract art? Media? I mean, gross stories?
Oh, well, all kinds of work. I mean, there's all kinds of work out there that that today resonate really hard. And yes, I think some of the most interesting work is on the internet and not necessarily in the art world. And I'm writing right now about somebody who is in Houston who doesn't have anything to do with any galleries or museums at all, and everything is on Facebook, which is hard because I'm not on Facebook anymore. This is an artist actually, his name is Jim Pirtle, and he's doing this whole series of videos and environments and performances that are basically like fake scientific stuff. And I think what he's doing is playing with all this, you know, glorification of STEM and also even glorification of interdisciplinary art, which we're not allowed to make fun of, but yes, people, you know, art and science go back to Leonardo da Vinci. This is not a new idea, but we think it's new today. Anyway, I can't really answer your question is the short answer. I mean, I think that the art that I love is the art that I love. Yes?
So when you're going to judge or curate a show, how do you approach it then?
Oh, well, like I recently juried a student show. The way I approach something like that is I'm looking, a student show is a bad example. I approach judging art or looking at art the way I think everybody judges art or looks at art. We have a culture now where you're not supposed to say that you judge anything, and we can't be judgmental, and we're not picking favorites, and nothing is the best. But I defy anyone in this room to say that you don't go into a gallery and say, oh, that's my favorite, or oh, that's better than that. I mean, we're always making judgments. It's part of our capacity as rational and, animals to make distinctions between things as better or worse. Now, what I say is better or worse is not necessarily going to be what you say is better or worse. And that's where it gets interesting. And that's why sometimes it's really tempting with contemporary art to just retreat into the safety of old art, because it's kind of been vetted. And you're going to usually see better examples of it, particularly when you go to museums. The problem with that, of course, is that whatever that art was doing at the time, whatever it was drawing people's attention to in the 16th century, or whenever, that fall of the rebel angels, Peter Bruegel the Elder painting, is in the midst of this Catholic Protestant. I mean, it's talking to people contemporaneously about things that we're not even aware of. So it's hard to get into the mindset of art when it was made, again, to that point. But yes, we always make judgments. And I defend our right to do so to the death. Yes.
So would you say that you've expanded a huge audience that you never had before, and there are more people involved in being interested in contemporary art, that it expands as something that people care about? Or would you say that we still have the same precious, maybe 5 to 10% of people who care?
Oh, that's a great question, Gail. I think that America has a deep vein of anti-intellectualism that goes back to our founding and before that. So we're up against it's a tough battle in this country, I think that I have been talking to people, I was telling Terry this story this afternoon, that whenever I talk to people who are like, but art. Like it's this frivolous thing. It's a frivolous, luxurious, stupid thing to do, waste of one's time. What I like to say is, I don't know about you, but what I'm going to remember on my deathbed is not differential equations or organic chemistry, even though those things may make my life and all of our lives far more comfortable and nice to live. What I'm going to remember is the stories that I love and the songs that I love and the people that I love and things that come from art. And I think that's true of most people. And, if you look in the archaeological record, there is art before there's pretty much anything, before religion, before agriculture or writing or anything but the most crude technology, little handheld tool stones that you would chip at things, there's art there. So why is that? Why is this fundamental to our species? Why are very, very early humans struggling to survive, making art, drawing attention to the hunt or the moon cycle or whatever it might be? And I think it's because it's a survival mechanism to our species, and we need art to draw our attention to that which is really important. And today, what art draws our attention to that which is really important is a certain richness and beauty of life, to me anyway. That's the art that resonates with me, is that reminds me that, oh yeah, life is beautiful. So, I don't know about you all. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all so much for coming out, and thank you for reading. Go see some art.